So let's just be clear here and certain. Would you agree, Mr. President, that it is the federal government can unquestionably suspend the privilege if the public safety requires it during times of rebellion or invasion?
Yes.
So you please describe for the court the overall situation in Maryland at the time you suspended the writ?
Well, there were rebels just across the Potomac River threatening the nation's capital. I could see a Confederate flag from a window of the White House. Loyal and patriotic men came down from Massachusetts and other places in the North to protect their nation's capital. And when they got to Baltimore, they found their way blocked by a disloyal mob in the streets. And soldiers were killed trying to come to save their nation's capital. After that, disloyal men in Baltimore burned the railroad bridges into the city, and troops couldn't get to Washington at all. So while General Winfield Scott was improvising a land and water route for the salvation of the capital, I can remember back then pacing up and down alone in a room in the White House, and I looked up north from the direction the troops would come, and I can remember saying, "Why don't they come? Why don't they come?" And at the same time, many moderate and sober men wrote me when they heard that the Capitol was threatened, and they told me to lay Baltimore in ashes if it got in the way of the salvation of the nation's capital. So I thought suspending the writ of habeas corpus along the route was a more humane solution.
The prosecution has also noted that you did not comply with Supreme Court Justice Roger Taney's order. Refer you to Defense Exhibit 1. Is this the man?
It is.
Is he the man also who authored the 1857 Supreme Court Dred Scott decision that determined, as is quoted up here, all descendants of Africa are so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect?
Yes.
Why, Mr. President, did you disregard the opinion of Justice Taney?
Well, the opinion of the Chief Justice is just that. It was one man's opinion. It's not the opinion of the Supreme Court of the United States. I respect that, of course. But in fact, Mr. Taney was sitting alone in his chambers when he decided, and this is because each justice of the Supreme Court as an individual, under the Judiciary Act of 1789, has original jurisdiction for federal prisoners in habeas corpus appeals. Because of that, he could sit in his chambers and issue this decision, but he acted alone. The matter of the constitutionality of the suspension is too important to be left to the decision of one man. And let me remind you that that man has never been elected to any office by the vote of the people in his whole long life. Now, I know that there have been accusations against me of one-man rule, but I'd like to ask, what could be more a case of one-man rule than this isolated and lonely decision of Mr. Taney sitting in his chambers trying to prevent the President of the United States from quelling a gigantic rebellion?
You believed you were acting as any responsible executive would have done in such a time of crisis.
Yes.
Now, Mr. President, I think I'd like to turn to the second article of impeachment that deals with emancipation. When you became the chief executive of this country, you issued a very reassuring address during your inauguration. And one of the things that you said was in the first excerpt there, where you basically said you would not directly interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. Do you recall that, sir?
Yes, I recall saying that before the rebellion, yes.
Before the rebellion. You also said you believe I have no right to do so. Is that correct?
That's right.
By saying before the rebellion, sir, does that mean that after the rebellion there are different rules to the game?
I thought it a military necessity.
I'd like now to talk with you about the Emancipation Proclamation. The Impeachment Article 2, Specification 1 says that slave property is sacred by the federal Constitution. Do you agree or disagree with this?
Oh, I disagree with that, and so did the founders. The Constitution nowhere affirms the right of property in slaves, let alone saying it's sacred. It is not sacred. they did not even want the word slavery to appear in the document, and they never used it, let alone giving it some kind of biblical sanction. In fact, the Constitution doesn't mention the word slavery, period. And that's because the founders looked forward to a better time and to an eventual emancipation. And I think they're looking down on us now, happy over what the Emancipation Proclamation has done. In fact, I think they expected it to happen sometime in the future.
So is it also accurate to say that these slaves, free and free blacks, forced by law to work, provided much of the logistical support?
Yes.
And this freed up more Confederate soldiers for combat duty?
Yes.
Did you believe that slaves were an essential and critical component of the Confederate war effort?
Yes. Look, as soon as this gigantic rebellion broke out, I asked the head of the Bureau of the Census to give me an estimate of the available white manpower in the insurgent states, the men of military age there. He put it at about 1,116,000. Now, our estimates are that some 900,000 of those, by conscription and other drastic methods, have been put into the ranks of the Confederate armies. As loyal as our people are in the North, we cannot match that rate. The military experts, they tell me that we need something like a 3-to-1 manpower advantage to win against the defensive advantages of modern firearms. Well, that's a lot of people. We can't match the rebels' rate of mobilization. And why? It's because we do not have slaves to carry on the work of our economy. They do. Slavery makes their war effort possible, and we've got to hurt that somehow, and we can by helping the slaves to freedom.
Mr. President, please address the spurious charge that by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, you overturned the entire framework of the United States government that is based on checks and balances.
You know, by doing this, we have saved this government from rebellion, and we've saved it, checks, balances, and all. We still have elections. No election in the North has been postponed. We still have a freely elected Congress with the power of the purse. We still have a Supreme Court with the power of judicial review. And they have said that this is a war and a legal one. We're going to have a presidential election in a couple of weeks. I remind you of that. And I think that no one who has seen the huge public rallies and the parades and heard the thousands of speeches on both sides, no one could look at that and say that the discussion of issues is not as free now and as open as in any previous election in this country's history. It is my duty to pass these democratic and free institutions along to future generations of Americans and not let them be lost to a slaveholders' rebellion.